Okay, good afternoon, dear friends. Shalom Aleichem, Bruchim Abam to the Kollel Agad Perka Monday afternoon National Shir. Welcome, everyone. Before we begin, I want to make sure everybody knows about the new Sefer, Tzipisel Yeshua, Yearning for Redemption. Now we're holding in the Shiva Dinachemta, in the 7 weeks of consolation, and the consolation is specifically to yearn for the Geula and await the redemption. So go to artscroll.com or go to your closest Svarim store and make sure you take advantage of this time of the year. We have an amazing topic tonight. We have a very important topic. This is a subject you've all been waiting for. You didn't realize you've been waiting for it, but that's what I'm here to share with you. This is a very important topic. Today we're going to talk about jokes. We're going to learn about jokes. And don't tell me you know about jokes. You don't know about jokes. You don't know enough about it, that's for sure. Because considering some of the jokes that I've been hearing lately, I think everyone needs to brush up on the topic of jokes. Yeah, you heard correctly. In order to understand what a joke is and what the role of a joke is, we have to know what the source of a joke is. Don't go anywhere. The pasuk says like this, the opening pasuk in Parshas Eikev, V'haya Eikev tishma'un, and it will be Eikev. The Targum says chalaf, reward. Eis ha-mishpatim ha'ela, u'shmartem v'asisem ha'isam. V'shamar Hashem leikecha l'chas habris v'yasachesed asher nishba la'aveisecha. So the pasuk is saying that this will be the reward for the mitzvahs. But the $1 million question is, don't you remember the last pasuk of Parshas Va'eschanan articulated there is no reward for mitzvahs in this world. The pasuk says, Hayahim la'asoisam, today to do. And Rashi brings down from the Gemara in Erevin, Hayahim la'asoisam, ulamachar lekabel scharam, because schara b'hayam aleka, there's no reward in this world. You can't expect to be rewarded in this world. So, it's one thing to have a pasuk tell us about the reward for mitzvahs. It's another thing for that pasuk to be following immediately after the pasuk that says we're not rewarded in this world for mitzvahs. The last pasuk of Eikev was Hayoim la'asoisam, and now all of a sudden, immediately in the next breath, it says V'haya Eikev tishma'un, and it will be the reward for listening to the Torah. So that's the question: are we rewarded in this world for mitzvahs, or are we not rewarded for mitzvahs? So this is addressed by none other than the Chida, Ga'oinu Zeinu, Reb Chaim Yosef David Azulai. Reb Chaim Yosef David Azulai says that the Kadmoinim already wonder, how could the Torah be telling us about the reward for mitzvahs in the same breath, Toich Kedei Dibor, of the pasuk Hayoim la'asoisam. It says Hayoim la'asoisam ulamachal lekabel scharam, and then it talks about ubeirach privit necha friad masecha. That implies that certainly there will be reward. Says the Chida, there is no question. Schara b'hayam aleka. Hayoim la'asoisam umachal lekabel scharam. There is no reward for mitzvahs in this world. However, v'haya Ein v'haya ela lashon simcha. We know vayehi is a lashon sar. Vayehi b'mei Achashverosh. Vayehi is a lashon sar. V'haya is a lashon of simcha. Hayoim la'asoisam. You get reward you don't get rewarded for doing mitzvahs in this world. However, v'haya, the simcha that you engender when you perform a mitzvah, that Eikev tishma'on, that you're rewarded for. You're not rewarded for the mitzvah itself. Don't expect to be rewarded for putting on tefillin in this world, or for learning Torah, or for doing chesed. But v'haya, the simcha that you arouse when you do a mitzvah, Eikev tishma'on, that you are rewarded for in this world. You see, the mitzvah itself is the Devar Hashem, and therefore there is nothing in this finite world that Hashem could offer us to repay us in this world. But v'haya, the input, what we input into the mitzvahs, v'haya, the simcha that we put into the mitzvah, that is Eikev tishma'on, that we are rewarded for in this world. So we know the importance of simcha from the opening pasuk in this week's parsha. The Gemara in Shabbos says on Daf Lamed Amud Beis, there's a big contradiction. Is simcha good or is simcha not good? Even though many people like to sing a song, mitzvah gedahila lihais besimcha. Where does it say that? It does not say that in Chazal. Nowhere in Chazal does it say there's a mitzvah to be besimcha tamid. Chazal say, ivdu es Hashem besimcha. David HaMelech says, we serve Hashem in joy. On the other hand, Shlomo HaMelech says, Simcha mazu isa. What is the purpose of simcha? So the Gemara says in Shabbos, V'shibachti ani es ha-simcha, zu simcha shel mitzvah. I praise simcha, that is the simcha of performing a mitzvah. Ula simcha mazu zo asa, zu simcha she'ena shel mitzvah. Simcha of a mitzvah is praiseworthy. Discretionary simcha does not have value. Lelamedcha she'ein shchina shoira loy mitoich atzvus v'loy mitoich atzlus v'loy mitoich schoik v'loy mitoich kalus roish v'loy mitoich sicha v'loy mitoich dvarim b'telem ela mitoich devar simcha shamitza. This teaches us the Shechina does not dwell not from sadness, not from laziness, not from levity, not from lightheadedness, not from idle conversation, not from empty words. Only mitoich simcha shel mitzvah. Shenemar v'yata kechuli menagein. And now take from me a musician. V'haya kenagein hamenagein. And it will be when the musician plays, v'atihi alav ruach Hashem. Actually, the pasuk says, v'atihi alav yad Hashem. And I know what you're thinking, that's not how the song sings it. Well, we'll go with Shlomo HaMelech on this one, okay? Shlomo HaMelech says, Vatihi alav yad Hashem. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, v'chein ledvar halacha. Not only for the Shechina do you need simcha, to learn halacha you need simcha. Amar Rava, v'chein lechaloim toiv. Also to have a good dream, you need simcha. You know, don't think you could just go to sleep and expect to have a good dream where you're lying there on a hammock and you're eating grapes and you're drinking lemonade. My holy brother is showing the book, very good. Don't think that you could just have good dreams. If you want to have good dreams, you need to have joy. You need to go to sleep in a good mood. If you want to dream about fluffy teddy bears, you have to make sure you go to sleep in a good mood. But if you go to sleep in a rotten mood, I don't know I'm afraid to tell you what kind of dreams you might have. So there are three things in this world you need happiness for. Number one, the Shechina. Number two, halacha. And number two, chaloim toiv. In fact, the Ben Yehoyada says, the word simcha is Rashi Tevos, the three things you need simcha for. Simcha stands for Shechina, Memches Mara Chaloim, Hey Halacha. All of those three things need simcha. Simcha is a Rashi Tevos. It stands for Shechina, Mara Chaloim, Halacha. That's what you need simcha for. So the Gemara asks, really? Is simcha good? You need simcha to learn? But the Gemara says, "V'amar Rav Gida Amar Rav, Kol Talmid Chacham sheyoshev lifnei Rabbi ve'ein sifsoisav noitfois moer tichvena." Any student who sits before the rabbi and his lips are not dripping with dread will be burnt. Shanemar sifsoisav shoishanim noitfois mar oiver al tikri mar oiver ela mar oiver al tikri shoishanim ela sheshoinim. That we darshan the pasuk sifsoisav shoishanim. The lips of those who learn noitfois mar need to be dripping with awe. How could you say learning needs simcha, but a Talmud needs to sit in front of the Rebbe with fear and awe and trepidation? Says the Gemara, loy kasha ha b'Rabbah v'ha b'Talmud. It depends who. The Rebbe needs to be joyous. The Rebbe needs to come in with a big smile, with a happy word, with simcha. The students need to be scared out of their living daylights. Okay? So when you sit in front of your Rebbe, you need to be scared out of your living daylights. The Rebbe should be happy. The student should be frightened. But then the Gemara says, no, both are talking about the Rebbe. V'loi kasha. Hamakami deliftach, halabasar de pasach. It depends when. Before you start learning, you should be joyous. Once you start learning, you learn be'ema uvayira. Ki haderabba, just like Rabbah. Mekame de pasach lehu l'Rabbanan. Before he would begin learning with Rabbanan, Amar milsa de b'dichusa. He said a light comment, a joke. Ubadchi Rabbanan. And the rabbis laughed. By the way, that's the bigger chiddush. The fact that the rabbi said a joke, that's not such a lot of rabbis say jokes. The fact that it was a funny joke, that's a big chiddush. Not every rabbi could say a funny joke. Many rabbis try to say jokes. Doesn't mean anyone laughs. Sometimes the people stare at him. They don't know if that was a joke or a hesped. They're not sure what the rabbi meant. But the Gemara says the rabbi should start off with a joke, but l'soif, in the end, Yosef be'imasa upasach b'shmaitza. In the end, they would sit in fear, and he would open up the learning. So the Gemara says that before one starts learning, it's appropriate to start with milsa dibdichusa, and once you get going, you learn be'ema uvayira. And who's the paragon of this model? Rabbah. So the first question I was wondering about is, why do Chazal tell us that the example of someone who started off shir with a good joke was Rabbah? Why of all the Amoram is Rabbah held up as the Amora who would start off with Milsa Dibdichusa? You know, we don't find Rabbi Akiva started with a joke. When Rabbi Akiva's students were falling asleep, he told them a whole Agadata, a whole Medrash that Esther ruled over 127 Medinos in the merit of Sarah's 127 righteous years. Why is Rabbah held up as the paragon of someone who would say a joke? One thing we know is Rabbah lived a very tragic life. The Gemara tells us in Moed Katan Daf Chavches, Rav Chizda Chaya Tishin V'Tartin Shnen. Rav Chizda lived 92 years. Rabbah Chaya Arba'in. Rabbah only lived 40 years. Bei Rav Chizda Shitin Hiluli. By Rav Chizda there were 60 weddings. Bei Rabbah Shitin Tichli. By Rabbah there were 60 funerals. Bei Rav Chizda Smida Lekalbi V'loy Misbai. By Rav Chizda they were able to feed fine flour to the dogs even. By Rabbah they couldn't even feed the people with animal food. So Rabbah lived a very short life. Rabbah lived a very tragic life. Rabbah lived in poverty. Moreover, Rabbah was not well liked. The Gemara says in Shabbos Kufnun Gimel, Amar le Abaye le Rabbah kagoin mar desanu le kulu pumpadisai. Everyone in Pumpadisa hated Rabbah. Rabbah was a rabbi. What do you expect? You know, people would be checking their phones in the middle of davening, and Rabbah would say, "What are you doing? You're not to bring a phone into a shul. This is not a bar. It's a Beis HaKnesses." People would come in with like a 64-ounce cup of coffee, and they would start drinking in the middle of davening. And the Gemara says Rabbah was not well liked. The Gemara, I looked up some of the history of Rabbah. Besides this Gemara in Moed Katan, the Gemara in Eruvin says he didn't even have a loaf of bread to make an Eruv. The Gemara in Gittin says that Rabbah was very distressed about his debt, and because he was not well liked, they were malshin on Rabbah, and it caused his untimely death. Look in Bab Metzia. So maybe Rabbah, because of his difficult life, in order for him to put himself in the proper frame of mind to be able to learn Torah, he would first start off with Milsa Dibdichusa in order to put himself in the right frame of mind. We once learned, when we were preparing about the Balei HaTosfos, Rabbeinu Tam, who was very wealthy, before he would learn, he would count his money. He was very wealthy, and after he would count his money, he would say, Toivli Toiras Picha! Good, delicious is the learning of my mouth. Me alfei zahava kesef. After counting all my thousands of silver and gold. So we see that if need be, especially someone like Rabbah would begin with a joke. But really what I was thinking about is, what kind of jokes did Rabbah make? Rabbah would come, knock knock, who's there? Rabbah. Rabbah who? I mean, come on, the Rabbah said knock knock jokes. Rabbah said, an Amora, a priest, and walked into a... How many Amoram does it take to change a light bulb? Well, what kind of jokes did Rabbah make? What were these Milsa Dibdi Chusa? So the Pnei Yeshua, I remember I was once looking into this topic and someone suggested, well, look in the Hakdamos of Svarim. Maybe in the Psicha of the Sefer, it will speak about the inyan of starting a shir, b'milsa dibdi chusa. Sure enough, in the Holy Sefer of the Pnei Yeshua, he discusses this practice of Rabbah, that Rabbah, before he would begin a shir, he would give a milsa dibdi chusa, and the Pnei Yeshua says it was bizarre to learn this Gemara simply, that Rabbah would say a joke. A joke is muksa mehadas. It should be moved away from any intelligent person. What, Rabbah made a joke? And the Gemara, in the cheshbon of the Gemara, can't mean he actually made a joke, because it's going on, ein shchina shoira loy mitoich schoik v'loy mitoich kalos roish v'loy mitoich sicha v'loy mitoich dvarim b'telim. So the Gemara says simcha shel mitzvah is permitted, but schoik and kalos roish ein ashchina shoira, only simcha shel mitzvah. And the Gemara says, v'chein ledvar halacha, that you need simcha shel mitzvah. And the Gemara says, not true. And the Gemara says, no, before you start, you need simcha shel mitzvah. And that's what the milsa dibdi chusa is. You can't say milsa dibdi chusa is knock-knock jokes. Or, why did the chicken cross the road? Because the Gemara says you can't start with schoik and kalas roish. Milsa dibdi chusa must mean simcha shel mitzvah. So therefore the Pnei Yeshua says, you have to say milsa dibdi chusa is one of two things. One approach is, Rabbah would start the shir with like a Torah riddle to sharpen the minds of the Talmidim. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't, what do you do when you cross a zebra? None of that nonsense. It was like a lechidud ba'alma, like the Gemara finds, like we find in many places, by Rabbah himself. It says, V'Rabbah lechadude la'Abaye Yehuda Aved. Many times in Shas, the Gemara says Rabbah was sharpening the mind of Abaye. And that's all before he began to actually learn. But once the shir began, they would sit be'emo v'yira, and they would learn la'asuke shmaita liba dehochasa. So milsa dibdi chusa is not some kind of, 101 jokes for Amoraim. It was a riddle to sharpen the minds of the Talmidim. Or, says the Pnei Yeshua, it was milsa dibdi chusa refers to agadata. Agadata causes the heart to rejoice. It whets one's appetite for learning. So the Pnei Yeshua learns milsa dibdi chusa is not joke, it's either a riddle or it's divrei agadata. Likewise, in the Tshuva Me'ava of Rabbi Elazar Flackles, he brings Kol Maskil Yishbait B'Tzedek, any intelligent person will come to the just conclusion. Rabbah, who is the master, Rabbah was the master of the whole Shas, he didn't say jokes for people to laugh. You don't need people to laugh to learn. The Torah itself is Mesameach. The Pilpul is Mesameach. You don't need a laughter from an outside external source. The Tshuva Me'ava says what it means is that he would begin with Divrei Agadata and Divrei Musar to inflame the heart with Yiras Hashem. Otherwise, if they would just learn, then maybe they're learning for an intellectual pursuit, intellectual stimulation. So now by Rabbah beginning with Divrei Agadata, this will ensure that everyone will learn L'Shem Shamayim. This way, when they learn Dvar Halacha, they will do so with fear of God, they will do so with Ema and Yira, and not just to intellectual gymnastics. So the Milsa Dibdi Chusa is like Divrei Musar. Just like Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo HaMelech, how does he begin Mishlei? He says, Mishlei Shlomo ben David, Ladas Chachma Umusar Lahavin Imrei Bina. If you want to know wisdom, you need to know Chachma and Musar to understand Bina. How? Lakachas musar. First you learn musar, and you inspire your heart, you set your heart aflame in Yiras Shamayim, and then you could learn Torah. So the approach of the Pnei Yeshua and the Rabbi Elazar Flackles, Pnei Yeshua says either it was a riddle or it's some form of Divrei Agadata. One of the great old-time poskim, we were recently at his kever in Lithuania, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, buried in Kavna. In his Hakdama to the Eim Yitzchak, he also learns that the idea that is expressed in the Gemara in Shabbos on Daf Lamed Amud Beis to begin with Divrei Milsa Dibdi Chusa, he says that he's seen many great Mechabrim whose Torah has been widespread all over the world. Before they proceed to uncover the world of Halacha and to swim in the Yam HaTalmud, they first offer Chidushe Agadata, like we find in the Gemara in Shabbos. That means also Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan understands that the inyan of Milsa Dibdi Chusa, these are not jokes, these are not humorous teachings, it's Agadata. However, interestingly, Rav Moshe Feinstein in the Dibros Moshe, he seems to learn simply that even simcha shel reshus mamish, where there's no obligation to be happy, there's no, on a day that there's no specific mitzvah to be happy. If someone rejoices discretionarily, but he does it so that it should assist his performance of a mitzvah, that's also simcha shel mitzvah. So in other words, even if somebody, it's a regular Monday, if somebody rejoices in order to be able to be in the right frame of mind to do mitzvahs, that discretionary simcha is simcha shel mitzvah. Elisha said, "Sheyikchu loy menagein." There's no mitzvah to listen to music, but since he was trying to bring upon himself hashras hashchina, that's called simcha shel mitzvah. That's what the Gemara in Shabbos says. What's simcha shel mitzvah? Music. But there's no mitzvah to listen to music. But if it was being listened to in order to bring down the Shekhinah, that's called simcha shel mitzvah. So any discretionary simcha that a person engages in order to perform the mitzvah, a person has to be mechavi in his heart, that would be considered a mitzvah. So Rav Moshe says that when the Gemara talks about rejoicing or milsa dibdi chusa before learning a dvar halacha, that Rabbah would say milsa dibdi chusa. This milsa dibdi chusa, it was not a riddle, it was not agadata, it was a humorous comment, it was something to make the Talmidim smile. Rav Moshe seems to learn this Gemara kipshutai, that it was some kind of humorous comment. Now I'm sure it wasn't a knock-knock joke. I remember, my grandfather, his jokes were, how do you know you're not to go through a red light? He would say, the pasuk says, Vayomer Edom loy savar bi. Edom said, don't cross me. So you're not laughing. You have to develop a taste for Torah jokes, So, but Rav Moshe learns that it was not divrei Torah. It was humor, some form of discretionary humor, and it's permitted in order to, so to speak, open up the heart. The Sefer HaTanya also seems to understand that the purpose of the Milsa Dibdi Chusa is to open up the mind, to make the heart rejoice for Torah, for Avodah, that it needs to be besimcha, like Rabbah would do to his Talmidim, that he would say Milsa Dibdi Chusa. Reb Pinchas Friedman, in his commentary to the Sefer Tanya, he writes that the idea of saying Milsa Dibdi Chusa comes from a klipa called Noiga. And this klipa could be ushered into Kedusha. Because when you say the joke to open up your mind and open up your heart, you're giving it entrance to Kedusha. But if this is not your kavanah, then you're bringing it back into the klipa. Okay. Now, what is the purpose of this joke? What is the function of the joke? Okay, the Tanya says, Rav Moshe explains that it's lefakeach datai. It's to open up the mind and to make the heart rejoice. Because when the mind is open and the heart rejoices, it allows a person easier access to understand Torah. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi has a different take on this. What is the role of humor as a preparation for learning? So, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi says like this, whenever we do a mitzvah, we always throw the satan a bone. We have to give shoichad to the satan. Because if we just go to do a mitzvah, the satan's going to interfere. He's going to accuse. He's going to try to create impediments in our performance of mitzvahs. So for instance, if we would just go ahead and put on tefillin, the satan would never let us. It's such a holy mitzvah. Putting the tefillin on our head is like the tzitz on the head of the kohen gadol. So what do? We give the satan a bone. There's a little hair that sticks out of the tefillin. The hair comes from an egal. And the satan says, oh, you're trying to remind Hashem about the chet ha'egal? Go ahead, go do the mitzvah. It doesn't bother me. In every mitzvah we do, we always throw the satan a bone. We have to throw him a bone. If we don't throw him a bone, he's going to always interfere. So how will the satan allow us to go learn Torah? If we're going to learn Torah, it changes the whole world. It destroys the Yetzer Hara. It's the kryptonite of the Yetzer Hara. How will the satan ever allow us to learn Torah? The answer is we have to throw him a bone. How do we throw him a bone? We make a little joke in the beginning of the shir. We tell the satan, don't worry, we're just kibitzing around, we're just joking around. So the satan says, oh, leitzanos, go ahead. And then the satan backs off, we threw him his bone, and then we're able to learn. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi is mashma that this milsa de b'dichusa is not just a riddle or agarata, but there's something in it that's an element of shoichad to the satan. By the way, the Bnei Yissaschar learns that even Hashem, where do we learn this behavior from? Even Hashem, when he spoke to the Jewish people for the first time, he also gave us, so to speak, like a light comment and a light teaching to open up our minds and open up our hearts before he taught us the Torah. The pasuk says, Koi Soimar Lebeis Yaakov V'saged Levnei Yisrael Atem Re'isem Yusoa Ashar Asisi L'Mitzrayim Va'esa Eschem Al Kanfei Nesharim. I let you ride on the wings of eagles. Va'ata Yisoim Shamaya Tishma. Now, Israel, listen to me. So the Bnei Yissaschar says, what do you mean, and now? What do you mean, now listen to me? As opposed to what? Says the Bnei Yissaschar, the Gemara tells us, Rabbah, before he would begin to give a shir, he would say, Milsa dibdi chusa. The explanation is, when a person is sad, then his laziness and his sluggishness, it gets the better of him. But simcha comes from ruach, which allows a person to soar. It's dynamic. It allows a person to be elevated. So Hashem says, remember what I did to Egypt? I carried you on the wings of eagles. So that's like a very joyous, happy message. Hashem says, remember you were riding on the eagle? Remember I carried you on the eagle? That's like the milsa dibdichusa that opens up the mind and widens the heart. And Hashem said, okay, now that I gave you this light, happy reminder, now va'ata im shamaya tishmu. Now you have to listen to me. Now that your heart is open, now it's time to open up to learn the Torah. So, one reason for the milsa dibdichusa, it's like shoichad l'satan. One is it opens up the mind to learn. Back to Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, according to this idea that it's, shoichad l'satan. We have to give the satan a bone. You ever notice a very interesting phenomenon? You advertise there's going to be a shir for men, and you come to the shir. There's like a dozen people there, a half a dozen people. Where is everybody? Ruvain had a vart. There was a vart in Lakewood. Lakewood? The guy never wants to go to Lakewood. All of a sudden he drove to Lakewood for a vart. Where's Shimon? Shimon went to an upsharon. At night, an upsharon? Nah, but he had to sweep up the hair that they cut during the morning, Levi, where's Levi? Levi went to a l'chaim. But nobody got engaged. Yeah, right, it was stam a l'chaim. He made a l'chaim, And Yehuda, where did Yehuda go? He went to a wedding. Whose wedding? He doesn't know yet. He didn't know. He went to the wedding hall. He'll find out when he gets there. You go to a men's shir, everyone has excuses. Where'd they go? A parlor meeting. The guy hasn't written a check in 70 years, but he went to the parlor meeting because it beats a shir. Everyone has a reason why not to be at the shir. But you give a woman shir, it's packed to the gills. There's standing room only, and they charge them money and they pay. By men, you could pay them to learn. You have to pay the men to learn. Then maybe the women, you could charge them big bucks, and it's packed. Every women's share, it's packed to the gills. Why is that? Very simple reason. Because men are obligated to learn Torah. So the Satan doesn't want them to learn. So he does everything in his power to stop them. Because the learning of men is the most important mitzvah in the universe. But women don't have a chiyuv to learn. Their Talmud Torah is not as powerful. And therefore, when there's a woman's share and women want to learn, they pack the shul like sardines. That's a well-known phenomenon. So here's another difference though. When men learn, the Satan's going to interfere. So you got to throw the Satan a bone. So the idea that you have to start with a joke is only by a men's shir. Women, the Satan is not interfering. Women don't have to start with a joke. Do you ever go to a woman's shir and the lady starts with a joke? They never say jokes in ladies' shir. They're very, very serious. By men's shiurim, the Maggid shir has to joke like 90% of the shir has to be a joke. By the women's shir, it's intense, I'm telling you. They get it very intense. There are no jokes by the ladies' shiurim. You know why? Because you don't have to throw the Satan a bone. The Satan's not interfering. So there's a beautiful Dvar Torah. Piha pascha b'chachma. When she starts learning, it's with Torah, not with a joke. Why? The Torah's chesed al-shayna. Her Torah is a Torah of chesed. She doesn't have to learn. She's not obligated to learn. It's a discretionary. It's a free will offering. Piha, when she learns, pascha b'chachma, she begins with chachma. Why? The Torah's chesed al-shayna. It's because her Torah is a Torah's chesed. So I once met Rav Eitan Feiner, and he told me a Dvar Torah that he saw many years ago. I think he said he thinks it was from Reb Shlomo Kluger. I said, where? He couldn't find it. So that was a big challenge for me. Baruch Hashem, I was able to find it in an old edition of Reb Shlomo Kluger on the Siddur, and I was able to send it. And Rabbi Feiner was very happy. He shared with me the following Dvar Torah. Not only should you begin with a joke, you should also end with a joke. What's the remez? Smeichim b'tseisam v'sasim b'vayam. Not only sasim b'vayam. Not only do you rejoice when you come, but it's smeichim b'tseisam. So now rabbis have to come up with two good jokes for a shir. One to start and one to end. Now why is it out of order? Because it's really going on the malachim. Smeichim b'tseisam. They rejoice when they leave the shamayim to do the will of Hashem. And then v'sasim, they rejoice b'vayam when they come back at the end. What about in the middle? Oisim be'ema ritzayin kainam. Once you get past the opening joke, don't expect this to be stand-up comedy. Don't think you're going to turn on the Agra the Pirka, I'm going to just be, badam bum, one after another. No, it's one in the beginning and one in the end. During the main body of the shir, it's oisim be'ema ritzayin kainam. The learning has to be be'ema v'yar. You start with a joke, you end with a joke. What's the inyan, says Reb Shlomo Kluger? Because when a person has the merit to do a mitzvah, are you really doing the mitzvah? You're not really doing the mitzvah. Hashem controls the world. Hashem is moving your limbs. He's moving your mouth. He's giving you the ideas. What are you happy about? You're not even doing it. What you're happy about is that Hashem selected you. Why did Hashem select you? because Megalgal and Zechus Ayidei Zaka, you took the initiative and Hashem allowed you to do it. So therefore you start a mitzvah with happiness. The Malachim start their good deeds with happiness. While they're doing it, they realize it's all Hashem. And when they finish, they rejoice again that they were selected because of their initiative. That's Smeichim Etzeisam V'sasim B'vayam. But while you're giving the shir, during the shir, it's Oisim Be'ema Ritzain Kainam. So we know there's an idea, Leka Midi Deloy Ramizi Ba'iraisa. There's nothing that's not alluded to in the Torah. There's nothing that's not alluded to in the Torah. Where in the Torah is there a remez that before you start a shir, you should start with Milsa Debdichusa? So we already saw, the Bnei Yissaschar says, that's how Hashem spoke to us. He first told us that I gave you a ride on the eagles, and then Hashem said, now you have to observe the Torah. But says the holy Ben La'ashri, by the way, the Ben La'ashri was Chidushim written by a Makubal, Rabbi Yitzchak HaKoyen Huberman, known as the Tzaddik of Ranana. He was a great Makubal, and he wrote a skula on his Sefer that if you say over his Divrei Torah in his name, he's going to bail you out. I'm actually right now completing a collection of all the pieces of the Ben La'ashri that are user-friendly, that people could say over. It's a 3-volume set. I'm condensing it into 1 volume. Actually, I once said this over, and the Rav Tzvi Kushalevsky and his Rebbetzin embraced this sefer very much. Reb Tzvi Kushalevsky was careful to say it over daily, and he had a big miracle. He was zeicha to have a baby. He was in his high 80s, and one of the zechusim that he attributes it to, obviously, it's all chesed and rachamei shamayim. He very much attributes that this sefer also is a great power. And Tzvi Kushalevsky was kind enough to write me a letter for this sefer and to describe the miracle that happened to him. The Ben La'ashri writes, the remez that before you learn you should say Milsa Debdichusa is in the opening pasuk of this week's parsha. V'haya, as we said from the Chidah, Ein v'haya ela lashain simcha. V'haya, when should you be besimcha? Eikev Rashi Tevois, Koidem, Asek, Batayra. Before you engage in learning. V'haya, Ein v'haya ela simcha. When? Eikev, Koidem, Asek, Batayra. And if you do that, Tishma'un, you will understand the Mishpatim and Dinei Mamanois, even the difficult selections of Torah, Leka Midi Delay Ramizi Ba'iraisa. If anyone wants to be Mishtatef in publication of the Sefer, you can let us know. But this is an important yesod in life. Sometimes, you're not in a good frame of mind, and it's hard to learn properly. So before you learn, you need to start with a good joke. Whether you hold like the Pnei Yeshua, that it's a riddle, or like the Tshuva Me'ava, that it's Agadata, or like Rav Moshe, that it's even a humorous comment. And then when the shir is over, then you could also end off with Milsa Debdichusa. So for today, I'm going to end off that now I don't want to take your time anymore, because I know you're going to go now to help your wife clean the house and clean the dishes and sweep the floor and maybe even cook supper. So, anyway, that's the idea. Smeichim b'tzeisam, v'sasim b'vayam. But while you're learning, it's oisim be'ema ritzayin kainam. It's even merumaz in the opening pasuk, v'haya ein v'haya ela lashan simcha, when? Eikev, koidem, asek, batayra. And if you do that, tishma'un, then Hashem will help you understand eis hamishpatim ha'ela, even the deep miktzos ha'Torah. Rabbi Isai, I hope you have a very happy rest of the day, and bracha v'atzlacha. I wish you all smeichem b'tzeisam. Have a good day, everyone. Kol tov.